Oh, hello student. Our last point, that is the growth model, in that we have seen the exponential growth. Then exponential growth that occurs where it occurs, it does not occurs in the nature, it occurs in the lab. Means only the increase in the population or decrease, whether increase or decrease that population can be find out these growth models. In that, the first one, exponential growth, that probably occurs in only the lab but not in a nature. The next one is the logistic growth. That logistic growth occurs in a nature. First point, it occurs in nature. Now while the logistic growth occurs in the nature, the most important thing, that is the source. In that source, there are, in nature there is the limited resources available. Second point is the limited resources are available in nature. So due to the limited resources available in the nature, there is a competition between the individuals for these limited resources, and those individually weak, they can out from that habitat or from that nature. So such a important things, according to the Darwin's laws, that we know the survival of the fittest, means only fittest that was given by the Darwin term, only fittest individual can survive. First things, can survive in nature and reproduce. This is important thing. Means those individual fit, they can survive and they can reproduce in a limited resources. In a nature, a given habitat, in any nature there is a habitat that is enough resources to support the maximum possible number, but beyond a certain time there is no further growth is possible because resources are limited. In limited resources, that is supported to the all the organisms, that is whatever present in that habitat, all the organisms, they can live very well in limited resources. But if the number of that animals, number of that organisms are increased, that time that resources are unable to support the increased population of that organism. So there is an important thing, in any ecosystem there is the carrying capacity. Ecosystem having the carrying capacity. Carrying capacity means what? The ecosystem or that habitat are able to carry the limited number of organisms. That is the carrying capacity. That carrying capacity is present every ecosystem. That can be represented by K. Means in any habitat the organisms can live, but optimum getting the resources. कैरिंग कैपेसिटी का मतलब क्या होता है कि इकोसिस्टम में जो ऑर्गेनिजम्स रहते हैं उनको कैरी करना, उनको फूड प्रोवाइड करना, उनको स्पेस प्रोवाइड करना अप टू सर्टेन लिमिट, दैट इज कॉल्ड द कैरिंग कैपेसिटी. इन अ गिवन हैबिटेट ऑल द ऑर्गेनिजम्स हैव द limited resources, but if the organism number increases, carrying capacity is unable, means that ecosystem unable to carry all the living things. Why? Because they have certain limitation. Then while the population grow in any ecosystem or in any habitat, there is a limited resources. On the basis there are 4 phases. Means what? In a habitat, suppose in a habitat or in an ecosystem, the population growth takes place, or population growing. Now this growing population having the limited resources in the ecosystem or in the habitat, with limited resources, then resources are limited in a habitat, in an ecosystem, and population grow. So such a growing population show 4 phases. Such a growing population shows 4 phases. Means while the growing that population, they having the 4 phases, and that phases are: first, lag phase; second, log phase; third, exponential phase; fourth, stationary phase, or we call the asymptotic phase. These are the 4 phases. When the population density reaches the carrying capacity, population density means when the population increases, that time the ecosystem having the carrying capacity, that when there reaches, there are the 4 phases. Just remember this point: in a habitat, population growing with limited resources, there are the 4 phases. Now when we plot the population density, means growing population, their size, relation to the given time, that result in one of the curve. That curve we call the sigmoid curve. Suppose here is a t for time, and here is a population size or population density. This is the sigmoid curve, or S-shaped. Like we have seen the exponential phase, there is the J-shaped curve. There is the J-shaped curve, and in this there is a S-shaped curve, or we call the sigmoid curve. Initially, those organisms, they are present in the habitat, they first lag phase, means they adjust the environment or they adjust the habitat. After adjusting, their growth is increases, that we called the log phase, growing population. After that, the resources are decreasing while there is the increasing the population. Then third phase they undergo, that phase is called the, sorry, this is not exponential phase, deceleration phase. This is called the deceleration phase. Now they undergo the deceleration phase. Third one is the deceleration phase, and finally they go the stationary phase, means their further growth of the organism is not possible. Why? Because the resources are undergoing to over. So such a graph is called is S-shaped or sigmoid curve. First initial phase, that we call lag phase, organism adjusts to the habitat or environment, and after that they undergoes the reproduces, they produces their number, and after production of number they utilizes the resources available in that habitat. After that, number of organisms utilize the more resources and then undergo the deceleration. There is the resources are available, but that resources may overcome, and when there is a straight line is formed, that we call the stationary phase. That time the resources may be completely overcoming. That is about the logistic growth curve. Then in a that curve is also another name that was given by the scientist. Such a type of population growth, the scientist is called the Weier's-Pearl logistic growth, because these two scientists first time observed such a growth occurs in a nature. Now growth related to the resources thing. For most animal population in nature or in a habitat, there is a finite resources, means resources having the limited, but they are finite. Sufficient resources are available, but that resources become limiting or after later when the population increase, resources are becoming the limited. Such a growth model is called the logistic growth model, and which one is the more realistic or believable growth pattern. Then under a particular condition, any organism can be selected in the nature. That selected organisms depends on one of the strategy. That strategy we call the reproduction. Reproduction is very important strategy for the growing population. Now some organism can reproduces only once in his lifetime, and some organisms reproduces more than one time. Like a crop of plants, their reproduction considered as only one times, once in a lifetime, that is the crop plants. But about the birds, mammals, their reproduction in a life more than one. So here example is given, the larger number of small sized offsprings. Some organism produces larger number, means their number is more but size is very small. There is the example is the oyster, pelagic fishes, and while others animals are smaller number but larger in offspring, that is the birds and mammals. Means reproduction strategy is very important for the population growth. Okay, these are the two growth models, exponential growth and logistic growth. Logistic growth is very important, that occurs in nature, there is limited resources are available. We can also considering the population of the human being that undergoes the logistic growth. Logistic growth, limited resources available है nature अपने about the population of human being, limited resources है, so the agriculture farm decreasing, industrial area is increasing. So such a drastic condition occur if the population increases more and more. The resources available in the nature, they are limited, and they may after some time or they cannot give sufficient resources to the human being. So thank you. We will see in the next part, that is the population interaction.